But then for whatever reason, and I cannot stress this enough, for whatever reason, a guy who had a pillow company started pushing and promoting election fraud conspiracies in 2020.
Who's he in bed with now?
Oh, God. My name is Brittlestar, not really.
And I'm Sandy Garasino, really.
And this is Canada Watching U.S. News. In the last 8 years, many have sought to align themselves with Trump's rise to power. Now, most of them have been disowned, disbarred, declared bankruptcy, jailed, as you mentioned, Sandy, or spoke against Trump at the DNC. Where are Trump's goons and henchmen now? Why are some still siding with Trump? What's next for them? That's what we're going to talk about today. There is a cast of characters like a comic book in front of me of people to talk about.
The comic book villains.
But they're not very good. They're not really super villains. They're just kind of villains.
They're bad villains. Poor villains.
Sort of, exactly. They're not very good at being villainy. But I mean, the first one that comes to mind to me, and it's the first one on the list here, is Rudy Giuliani. And I just massacred his name, Rudy Giuliani. And he's a fascinating character to me because I remember during 9/11 where he was like phenomenal. Like he was like
mayor.
Yeah.
America's mayor. There was no, the sky was limitless for him at that point, wasn't it?
It really was. And I remember there was sort of he provided a bit of calm, right? Because it was a very weird time, obviously, and a very scary time for people, and a tragic time, absolutely, all that kind of stuff. And he was kind of this weird bit of calm in the news cycle that would be like, we're going to do this. We're taking care of stuff. We're going to do this. Don't worry. It's going to be okay. It just happened like after, on the heels of his broken windows thing in New York, which always fascinates me. There's lots and lots and lots of problems with the broken windows policy, but there was tremendous positives that came out. Like New York is for better or worse, for some people's opinion, I guess, but is a much different town than it was prior to his broken windows theory. He really cleaned things up. The whole idea being, if people see broken windows on buildings, then they think the standard's lower, then they think that they can get away with doing anything, then crime goes up, then vandalism goes up, all that kind of stuff. And he's like, if we fix those windows as such, then things will be better. And they, in general, kind of were better.
In fairness to the doubters, I mean, I kind of want to give him that credit because he did step up in such a huge way after 9/11, and it was right away. He had the pulse. There was something, it was like a preternatural effect. He understood what to say and not to sugarcoat anything. I so remember him talking about this was such a mortal wound and far more than most of us thought that him talking to New Yorkers thought that we could cope with. I mean, he didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't soften the blow or anything, but he somehow gave people the confidence that they could weather that storm. They could carry it through. In fairness to the broken windows theory, violent crime in America and in most democracies, most Western countries, started to plummet at about that time. He kind of got to ride the wave of what is now considered to be a big demographic shift, which is that a lot of violent criminals, the baby boomers, they just kind of aged out of their
crime,
of their criming, and. So anyway, but fair enough. I do, but look what's happened. What's happened to this guy, Stuart?
Well, basically, God. I mean, he went from that point during 9/11, and he was the Times Person of the Year, shown on the cover of Time magazine with the caption "Tower of Strength," and it was him standing on what looked like the rubble of two towers, essentially. And as he's towering over the city, he's now the tallest thing in New York City. Since then, things haven't gone great, really, at all. Since his appointment as Trump's personal lawyer, he's gone on to be disbarred in New York, declared bankruptcy, indicted for his role in Georgia versus Trump, etc. ordered to pay $148 million for defamation of 2 Georgian election workers.
Mm-hmm.
And then most recently has been issued a lawsuit by those same Georgian election workers to have his assets seized after failure to pay the lawsuit. Assets including his New York City apartment, a house in Florida, his Mercedes, a watch collection, 3 Yankee World Series rings, and his hair dye. I'm just kidding about the hair dye.
Hair dye.
But this guy was the top of the top.
Mop it up.
Do you remember this? Do you remember the press conference he was giving, and he was, or whatever it was he was talking at, and there was the hair dye was dripping down the side of his face?
Yes, yes, of course. Like, who can forget? And the farting on television
oh my God.
during the hearings, and the Four Seasons total landscaping fiasco, and the Borat. What's the name of that guy? It's right on the tip of my
Sacha
tongue.
Baron Cohen.
Sacha Baron Cohen, the genius, the comic genius, Sacha Baron Cohen, catching him almost in flagrant delicto with it. I mean, the whole. Did I say fragrant? I was just thinking of the.
Well, it could have been fragrant delicto. It might have been, for all we know, based on the previous farting footage.
Anyway, but then but the worst thing was the lying about those election workers. It's inexcusable, and more power to those women. Was it Shay Moss and Ruby? Was it Ruby Freeman? The mother and daughter, and what they had to go through. I mean, the heartlessness of someone who supposedly cared about crime, knowing that the social media hordes, he set the mobs on them. Their lives were endangered by his callous carelessness and lying, knowing that he was lying.
He's, similar to a lot of Trump's former chums and sidemen, as we've talked to Bruce Heyman, the former U.S. ambassador to Canada, about this before, saying, I remember asking the question to Bruce, what's in it for these guys? Like, why do they sell their soul like this? Why do they do this? Yeah. And he was basically saying, well, they're going to get froze out of funding and connections and all that kind of stuff. And I understand that to an extent, but it seemed to me that Rudy, like, those guys have essentially nothing to lose. If they have to, they're begging every election cycle. They're begging to keep going. Yeah. Rudy Giuliani already had a legend built for him. Yeah. If he would have just quietly disappeared, he would have been thought of as, in the history books of the U.S., as like an absolute hero, despite many flaws, but in general, a hero. Yeah. Yeah. And he just kind of threw it all away. And I've often wondered, like, is that why? Do we think so?
I think that's well documented, that his sobriety is one of the biggest issues. But he's just desperate. He's just gone from. I mean, he's been for decades a close friend of Trump's, and I think he always thought that he could ride that. And it makes me very curious about his earlier years in New York, given what Trump's reputation in New York was, and Giuliani's reputation as, the prosecutor, the tough guy prosecutor who had no tolerance for criminals, and in particular was taking out gangs. Mm-hmm. And not gangs, the mob, that he was taking on the mob.
Yes.
And then you look at Trump's history there, and kind of shady past that everybody in New York talks openly about. And it's like, well, how real was all of this? Anyway, that's Rudy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's interesting about the getting rid of the mobs, of course, was it largely the Italian mob that he was responsible for kind of like getting rid of, but that kind of left a vacuum open for the Russian mob to essentially move in.
Well, I don't know that there's one single Italian mob. I think it was the John Gotti trial. Was that Rudy? Now we're into the vague memory.
Yeah, exactly,
I don't know.
Exactly.
World,
I sort of had been under the impression that he was essentially gotten rid of one faction of a mob, but basically opened the door for the Russian mob types to come in essentially and take over, which is why they've become such a huge player in general. There's just so much you could say about Rudy Giuliani, but I mean, what do we think is happening for him? What's going to be he should be just done, right? Don't we think?
Well, he's going to be financially ruined by these women, and I haven't followed exactly the labyrinthine pathway of his, because he was attempting to declare bankruptcy basically to free himself from this litigation. And it's my understanding, or from this damage award, and it's my understanding that the bankruptcy court has refused to give him that protection. Mm-hmm. So he is going to be, I think he's going to be ruined. I don't think he's got any prospect of ever being able to make that money back or be worth anything to anybody to the point that they would do anything. I mean, but, like all of these guys, like Trump himself is banking on getting elected in the hopes of being able to end a lot of his legal troubles, and in particular his criminal, his vulnerability to not just prosecution but actually prison. And a lot of these guys, they don't have anywhere else to go now.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, was there a point at which during all this stuff where he could have kind of bailed and saved part of his legacy, or was that done? Was it just done from the get-go, from 2015 on?
Well, remember, what I remember about 2015 and 2016 and that campaign was Rudy Giuliani lying about Hillary Clinton, pretending that she hadn't been at 9/11 when she had been, when she was the senator, and she's photographed standing with him. But I also remember, him seeming to be very, very aware of that WikiLeaks hacks that had been obtained from Russian hackers, that he seemed to have advanced knowledge of that, and he seemed to also to have advanced knowledge of the Comey letter. And why did the Comey letter happen? The Comey letter basically happened because Jim Comey had lost control of the New York office of the FBI. And there were a lot of rogue characters in there who were either close to retirement or retired, but knew a lot, and they were Rudy Giuliani's people. And they were leaking to Giuliani, and Comey knew it. And he knew that he couldn't keep it secret, that he was going to have to reopen this whole nonsense over the emails, which ended up being a nothing burger, as we all know. Mm-hmm. But I think from the moment that Donald Trump rode down that escalator, I think that was the beginning of the trajectory of Rudy Giuliani.
It's fascinating to see why someone like him would continue to double down on his support, even to this point, which is craziness, which is absolute crazy. I mean, there was alleged reports that he hadn't been paid for any of his work. He wasn't getting paid whatsoever. He allegedly funneled some of his income, which is like from his his canceled talk radio shows, into companies he owned, never reported any income from these things. And then also failed to disclose that he was starting to promote his own Rudy coffee brand. I mean, okay.
Which only did half as well as Trump steaks.
Yes, which is, well, you could use one as a rub. And was late to disclose a contract that he was to write a book. Do we think that he believes the things he says about his support for Trump and the stuff he says in general, or do we think that he's just trying to dig himself out of a hole? I think he didn't believe it, and it was like, yeah, sure, I'll go along with this for a bit. I think he might believe it now.
Well, a lot of people will believe whatever their skin depends on them believing.
Yeah.
A lot of these people really do seem to be true believers, even though, it's so hard to tell. I mean, look at somebody like Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
And what his trajectory has led him to. Does he believe that stuff, or is he just playing everybody for suckers? How will we ever No, I mean, there's not going to be, I doubt that. I used to believe that there were deathbed confessions and that people used to, in their last moments, they would regret and feel bad about things. I don't think that anymore. I think so. Some people are just rotten. They go right into the grave. They just slide right in, rotten to the core.
I think you're probably right. And that's not doesn't stop from being depressing. That's for sure. So do we think then that, I want to go back just to finish off with Giuliani. Do we think that he's like, his legacy is done? Like, do you think that, like, there's just, people don't even think about the 9/11 stuff anymore, do they? I think that's done.
He's done. He's done. Well, I don't think that, at the risk of, like, he's widely rumored to have a substance abuse issue. This is like believed to be common knowledge. And I just think he is so far, because he doesn't have a future. There is no future. I mean, the only future for some of these characters. Remember when Beck, who is the guy who briefly who had been a hard right guy on Fox, and then briefly, after Obama was elected, put on sort of professorial sweaters and pretended to be a reformed right winger.
Are you thinking about Glenn Beck? Is that what you're thinking
about? Glenn
Beck.
And so, I mean, I think that Rudy Giuliani's only hope of actually making money is to write a memoir.
Yes.
That tells the truth. But I don't think anybody would believe it.
I know. It'd be great because the cover is done. The cover is just the side of his head with that little bit of hair dye dripping down. Rudy Giuliani revealed. That's the name of the book or something. Broken hair dye. That's what we can call it as well. Another character that we should probably talk about is Mike Lindell, CEO and founder of MyPillow. He was quite again, one of these guys who started out with people thinking, okay, this is a good little redemption story. He was known for overcoming a cocaine addiction and taking his company from $100,000 to over $300 million in just 6 years. He said that's a big success story. That's pretty impressive for pillows, especially, which is crazy. But then for whatever reason, and I cannot stress this enough. For whatever reason, a guy who had a pillow company started pushing and promoting election fraud conspiracies in 2020.
Who's he in bed with now?
Oh, God. To a point where Dominion Voting Systems sued him for defamation in a $1.3 billion lawsuit in 2021. And then later, a Dominion employee also filed a defamation lawsuit against Lindell in 2022. He's been ordered to pay a software engineer $5 million for demonstrating that Lindell's election interference information was flawed. And as of July 17th of this year, admitted that things are not good for him financially amidst a flurry of lawsuits. I've got my home and a pickup truck, he said, estimating that speaking about election security has cost MyPillow around $300 million in revenue. But I'm not worried about it. I've been in the streets with no forks. I'll survive. I can't.
Is the MyPillow company, is that a publicly traded? I don't think that's a publicly traded company, is it?
Private company.
So it's just him. So our statements about his $300 million a year revenue might be as reliable as his statements about Dominion Voting Systems.
Yeah.
And whatever he got, I'm sure had to pay a licensing fee to a certain Donald J. Trump that was probably never disclosed. And I think there's still another voting machine company that is that has continued, that the lawsuit has continued. They didn't settle as Dominion Voting Systems did. I think that's still alive, that second company. So
I think so too. Yeah.
This is another character. Who doubled down, went all in, has lost everything, and is going to have far more liabilities at the end of the day. And no, Donald Trump is not going to be there for this guy.
And it's greed and lust for power, right? That's that to me, that can be the only motivators for, again, a guy who runs a pillow company to stick his neck in there and to stick his nose in and sort of start saying stuff and being, it just seems like, why did you do this to yourself? Why would you get involved in that? I mean, regardless if it was $300 million or not, I know that the MyPillow brand itself was successful, quite, big and obviously making some money. But man, it's just mind boggling to think like why he would do that. He'd have, during his voting system, Dominion voting systems issues, Fox News stopped running his advertisements. Like this is a guy who just stuck his neck out there all the way for Trump. And really anyone at the time, I feel, could have said, listen, there might be voter fraud, there might be election fraud, but nothing's been found and they are investigating. And the only reports I've seen so far is a couple of votes that were for Republicans were actually fraudulent, but they were so minor, it didn't really matter. Yeah. And I don't know why you would do that. Like again, is there a character type for these people? Is there a character type for the Giulianis and Lindells that they feel if they just get close enough to Trump that there's somehow some of that gold plating is going to rub off? Is that the idea?
Power is so magnetic. I mean, there's just no question about it. But it attracts flies.
Yeah.
Trump's brand of power attracts flies. But I mean, and it's interesting because we have to remember all of these people or most of these people are in touch with each other and were in touch with each other. Remember how that 2020 election went? And it was like, it took forever for them to announce the obvious, like for the networks to declare the obvious. Obviously, there was massive pressure coming from the Trump campaign not to declare the election results for days after everybody could see, everybody knew, and then when he continued to deny, and everybody just thought this was just a little minor thing, but now what's really clear, what's incredibly apparent about all of it, including, I mean, we haven't even got to all the congressional representatives that must have been part of this plot to refuse to certify the election results. They were going to block it. All of these people were coordinating with each other. There was clearly a criminal conspiracy to overturn the known and elected election results. And these people were all in touch with each other. They were all talking to each other and going down with the ship. And I mean, again, with Mike Lindell, I wonder again how much of this is does he have an addiction issue again? Because the personal judgment. But I think that once you're in that world, once you are completely, you become wedded to it and you really do go emotional. I mean, this is about an emotional home for them, I think. Mm-hmm. Don't you think that there's got to, this isn't just about, well, what's in it for me? This is also about, well, where are my people going to be?
There is a little bit of an emotional aspect to it because I think that you're right. Like to have that severe lapse of judgment and suspension of disbelief, really, and for judging character, is that there are people down the line, like you said. Do I think the election fraud thing was a criminally corrupt sort of let's push this forward, big agenda type thing? I'm not so sure it was that, apart from Trump saying, I need to win, and a whole bunch of people underneath him saying, I want Trump to like me. And that was it.
I think it was a lot more than that.
You think it was more than that?
Well, look at all the states that had these certified false electors that were those were frauds. And that was all organized by his camp, people in his camp. We still haven't got to a lot of those cases, but they're being prosecuted now, those false electors.
Well, for sure.
That was a coordinated campaign not to recognize the electors that were declared and certified by the state legislatures of those contested states. So that's not just, I just want to be with Trump.
But what's their payoff though? That's the thing that gets me, is that you've got the people who are down the line. You've got the people who are like your Rudy Giuliani's, and they're thinking, I'm going to sit beside the king, and I'm going to get all the the turkey legs he doesn't want, and the occasional gold bar. But there's people who are down in the state level who are doing stuff like, what's their payoff? Because you're right, they're being prosecuted and they're going to they're being jailed and such, and sentenced. I don't think there's enough money in it for them to do it.
I think it's the allure of power and the allure of celebrity. And if they had been able to be successful, they may have imagined that there would be a big role for them in some future. Maybe there would be some vacancy coming up. Look at how Trump took out everybody who was not a Trump loyalist. He made sure that all the MAGA supporters, that everybody had to kiss the ring. And if you did not kiss the ring, then you were going to get primaried. And they were primaried and they were taken out, like Liz Cheney was taken out. Those were kneecap jobs, and people could see that if you're a Republican, for the next 4 to 6 years, your job was to support Donald Trump and do everything to promote Donald Trump and do everything in your power to ensure his presidency and to get him reelected. And if you don't do that, then you don't have a future right now in the Republican Party. I mean, the real interesting question is, if he is not successful, what comes next for the Republican Party? But there's so many more of these characters.
There are so many. I mean, there's also, what you're saying about the Republican Party, one of my favorite tweets is Lindsey Graham in 2015 saying, if we elect Donald Trump leader of the Republican Party, we'll be destroyed and we'll deserve it.
And we'll deserve
Paraphrasing. I mean, he was totally right. Lindsey Graham is I could talk about him as well.
He's in ruins. He's another one. I mean, the shame of all of them and the humiliation of all of them.
So, I mean, you've got your intermediary type people, like the people that are somewhere in the middle ground, like your Tucker Carlsons, as it says here in the notes from producer Owen. Former bow-tied boy never wonder Tucker Carlson left the nest of boy never wonder, fired from Fox News in April of 2023. Fox never said the exact reason for his dismissal. It's largely believed to be the result of his actions in denying the outcome of the 2020 election, having cost the network $738 million. And seemingly in a dire position of last year, Tucker Carlson went solo, launching his own highly successful podcast featuring guests such as Vladimir Putin and other Trump henchmen like Steve Bannon. But he's not back, and he's a key player in getting J.D. Vance chosen as Trump's VP pick. So did Carlson just get out in time? Is he just a little bit too smart and he didn't say the stupid things out loud? Or did he say them out loud and then cover his tracks? Like, how does he survive so well? I think he has.
Like having Hitler sympathizers and Nazi sympathizers on his podcast, which was got big play. I don't know how we ended up here. Did he survive? Well, I know that there was a lot of talk at the time, some while back, when it was thought that the Republicans would choose someone else for their 2024 candidate. This was in the aftermath of the 2021 of January 6th, and you remember that Tucker Carlson was texting. These all came out now that he was texting. Stop this. He's got to stop this. This has got to come to an end. Of course, now he's sucked right back up. But I think a lot of this was that he himself had presidential ambitions. There was talk about him potentially being a nominee.
I didn't hear that. I was wondering. That's terrifying.
There was a lot of thought that he might be a successor. And I suspect that he's probably just continuing to feather his nest, to feather his own nest. And like you say, placing J.D. Vance is very interesting. The tension that has kind of broken out in the GOP over the Vance nomination, because of course that was championed by the tech bros in California, and and there's certainly a lot of talk that their real agenda was to eventually, hasten. Just have Donald Trump go to sleep for most of his presidency, and have J.D. Vance kind of be the actual acting president and answer to them. And I think that I can see that Tucker Carlson isn't separating himself very much from the tech bro world either. I think he's kind of playing that game. He's figuring that without being too much in the Trump camp, he's clearly a Trump sympathizer. He's clearly a MAGA figure, and he wants to remain a MAGA figure, and he wants Silicon Valley and the tech bro world to support him in that. And right now they are.
I feel that Tucker Carlson's one of the few players in this that is effectively playing Trump more than Trump is playing him. I think that he's using Trump's reach to his own benefit. So maybe that's the difference, is that he just seems a little bit smarter maybe than Mike Lindell, a little bit smarter than Rudy Giuliani, and is maybe just kind of walked around the edges of things as opposed to really putting his both feet in like the others have, maybe.
Although, things like his Putin interview, so much depends on what is the American mood after Trump going to be, whether Trump is elected for this term or not. We all know he's going to sleepwalk through the presidency. He's just going to be eating Cheetos and tweeting on what's left of Truth Social. If he's he'll try his mass deportations, but it's going to fall to his henchmen to kind of do a lot of the presidenting. But I think that the public is kind of souring on Donald Trump. I don't know whether that's just wishful thinking, because the polls are still tight, but there's still I'm noticing a real sense. First of all, Trump is not able to command the headlines and run the news cycles the way that he used to. The fact that he has taken over 6 weeks and cannot come up with a nickname for Kamala Harris is not a good sign. For in the mental acuity test, that would be how I would be looking at this. So I feel like there's going to be a post-Trump era. And does that mean turning the page, or does that mean doubling down? And I think Tucker Carlson is in the double down category. That's where we're going to have the Nazi sympathizers. But I think that America is just kind of getting, like, the hangover is starting to hit.
I think I think America is no different than many places. I think that when there's something shiny and new, that becomes the new focus. Growing up here in a small town, I remember the Sobeys supermarket opened up in 92, and people lined up to get into it. I was one of them. It's crazy. Go to hell, Zares. I don't need you anymore. Blah, blahs. But I think that's the attitude I think people will have in America's having now. They've got this shiny new thing happening with Kamala, and my only concern is I want to make sure that I don't want Kamala Harris to be too overexposed, because I think that
when is a presidential candidate overexposed?
I don't know. I just don't want
in the last 9 weeks of an election. That's.
I kind of want the election to be right now.
But remember, Stuart, you're one of the junkies. You and I, we're the junkies. We're watching this stuff all the time. There's a lot of people who are just starting to, Labor Days, we had Labor Day. Here we go. It's time to start. A lot of people are only just starting to pay attention.
That's true.
It's the low end, and this is going to be the time of the get out the vote effort. This is going to be the time of registering voters, getting people out there, and she has to be out there. She has to be. Nobody's going to be tired of her by November, whatever the date of the whatever that scary date on the calendar.
Yeah.
Is going
I
to be.
might
Nobody's
be
going to be
tired of it by then,
tired.
but I'm
You
still
might
going
be
to
tired.
vote. If I could vote for it, I'd still vote for it. So
yeah.
I must still be tired of it by then. So let's pivot a little bit over to the people the fish that wriggled out of the net. I guess some names here we could talk about. So Stephanie Grisham, former Trump White House press secretary, who went from taking vacations with the Trump family, that's a big thing, to describing the former president as someone with, quote, no empathy, no morals, and no fidelity to the truth, as she said to NPR. And then recently, she spoke at the DNC to proudly declare that Kamala Harris tells the truth, she respects the American people, and she has my vote. So you can get out, is my point. Adam Kinzinger as well, Republican congressman from Illinois, supported Trump until breaking rank as one of the 10 Republicans to vote for Trump's impeachment after the Capitol riots. He did not seek re-election, instead opting to join CNN as a political commentator. So he had no skin in the game. He could kind of get out and do his thing. Is that basically it? And then, of course, you got Liz Cheney. Actually, I'll stop before we talk about Liz Cheney. Stephanie Grisham and Adam Kinzinger, is it because they removed themselves entirely that they were able to feel like they were unshackled? They could talk freely about him and tell the truth?
Well, I mean, both of them, I think, probably get pretty reasonably healthy appearance fees on various networks like CNN and MSNBC. So they're probably, they've probably navigated that part of it all really well. I'm always shocked and disappointed the extent to which people are prepared to trade on this stuff. However, there's no question that this came at enormous personal cost to both of them, and they both lost a huge part of their network. And you spend a career building relationships and developing, that sense of trust, that network of people who that you can call, and they're going to take your call. And when you're in trouble or when you really need something, you've got that safety net of all the relationships that you built for many years, and they lost it. They lost it all. They sacrificed it all, and so there's a lot to admire there. I think there are certain individuals there among them that are. Again, there's a lot of long game playing. We talked about Tucker Carlson looking at the post-Trump era, and I think these people as well are looking at the post-Trump era. I think the post-MAGA hangover, that if Trump loses, and if the Democrats actually pick up the House, which I think is possible. I haven't really checked the numbers on that, but I think it's certainly close now, and the wins are with them. I don't think there's any doubt that the momentum is with the Democrats.
Sure.
And if Trump loses and the Republicans lose in this election, the impact is potentially going to be enormous, because this will now be Trump's really his third loss of the popular vote, but he has been a loser. When he came in 2016, he got the House and the Senate, I think, and then he progressively lost. He lost all of those by 2020. And then he lost, they scratched back and clawed their way back in 2022 and got the House, but by a much smaller margin. The Republicans, and I don't know how they extricate themselves from the power of the MAGA voters at the primary level, and what that's going to look like, and how they scratch and claw their way back into national competition. Because once Trump is gone, he's the biggest flag, he's the flag bearer,
absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
How do it's one thing to say, oh, well, there'll be the post-Trump, but this has been the most charismatic, most successful, most dynamic figure in American politics.
Yep.
I mean, the thing is that I would say since Reagan, but, I'm old enough to remember when Reagan was kind of a joke and then he got rehabilitated into the greatest president of the post-war era. But for the Republican rank and file, Trump is it. Like, everybody is gone. The Bushes are gone.
Yeah. There's no rock stars left. There's no rock stars.
There's no, like at that Republican National Convention, nobody was there from the old era. There was none of the figures. And the military, you look at Mattis and Milley and all of these, and Kelly, and McMaster, who's still kind of doing a little bit of a groveling, but he was a bad guy, but I'm still going to grovel because I can't quit him. But I mean, I just don't see. I don't see.
Living in a Brokeback Mountain quote was good. That was like, it was nice. It was good.
But I don't see how the Republicans after Trump, and mark my words, if he loses, first of all, he's going to say the election was rigged and he's going to contest it.
Yeah.
And he's going to continue to try and hold on to that party. He's got his daughter-in-law in as the chair of the Republican Party, and he's got control of the party. So I don't know where they go. So what is the game for people like Kinzinger and Stephanie Grisham?
I mean, they have to just distance themselves entirely. I mean, they just have to that's their old life. As Kinzinger said at the DNC this year, he said Trump had, quote, suffocated the soul of the Republican Party. Then you've got people like Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney.
There's the interesting figure.
Yeah, I agree. She picked up the mantle of her father, Dick Cheney's conservative ideology, but has long been a critic of Trump, specifically his foreign policy, though Cheney often voted for Trump and Trump's agenda. She voted against Trump's first impeachment, was one of the 10 Republicans to vote in favor of Trump's second, following January 6th. In 2022, she lost the seat to pro-Trump candidate Harriet Hageman in a landslide 28% to 66% election. Since then, she's continued to be a vocal critic of Trump, Trump's allies such as Tucker Carlson, as well as releasing a memoir, and his allies such as Tucker Carlson, and floating the idea of a future presidential run. I don't think she stands a chance, to be honest. Maybe. I don't think she stands a chance, but I've been wrong before. The Cheney urged voters not to elect Donald Trump in December of 2024. Cheney has not spoken on Harris' nomination except to call Biden stepping aside brave, as well as choosing not to speak at the DNC despite being asked to. Cheney is believed to be considering support for Harris more effective at a later date and still negotiating the terms. So to be fair, I don't think that she stands a chance of being elected president in a presidential run. However, I don't know.
Never?
Yeah, 2020 never. And I do think though that she's probably in the best position to scoop up the embers of the Republican Party and turn it back into something again.
I think that,
you think
so
I'm
much
wrong.
Depends. I look at somebody like Nikki Haley and I go, Nikki Haley's also playing a very interesting game here. Because Nikki Haley is an excellent student of the everybody forgets everything school of politics. And they will forget that I kissed the ring. And they'll remember that I opposed him. So there'll be an ad of me saying everything for everyone or anything for anyone. Liz Cheney has kind of boxed herself in, but Liz Cheney does have the advantage. She herself is a brilliant politician. And her father, of course, Dick Cheney, who was the vice president. And speaking of vice presidents who are really the real president, the acting president, her father was the master of that role, and is probably the best political strategist outside Trump world. And he has doubled down. Remember there was that, I'm trying to remember of that I can't remember what the occasion was, whether it was a congressional vote or something happened. And nobody in the Republican Party appeared. I think the Democrats were there in full, and everybody in the Republican Party except for Liz Cheney, and then her father came and sat beside her. And she was the only one. I wish I could remember what that occasion was. I have enormous respect for her. Her work on the January 6th hearings was incredibly powerful, and that will stand the test of, it's not only going to be writing the, what's your political future in 2028, 2030, the coming elections. Her name is written in history now.
Yeah.
Because of her role in those January 6th hearings. And she has a plan, but what it'll be and how long it will take, that's the question. But she's a far better political strategist than me. And she understands her party and she understands her supporters better than me. That's a story that history has yet to write.
You said mark my words earlier. I'll say mark my words. I feel that she's going to be the one to resurrect the Republican Party after this. I feel that this election coming up, that the Republicans will lose, I think handily, to the Democrats. And I feel that the Republicans in general, the party will be thrown into turmoil because there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff that happens after that will just throw them into turmoil. There's going to be a bunch of people jumping ship. And I think also there's going to be Liz Cheney waiting patiently for the last little floating bit of wood of the Republican Party ship. And she's going to jump on, stick her flag on it and say, everybody who wants to build a better ship, come with me. For better or worse for the rest of us. But I think that's it. Hi. So Brittlestar here. Literally right after we finished recording this episode, Liz Cheney stated her support for Kamala Harris. As our producer Owen said, the winds of change do be blowing.
It's interesting to see John McCain's son coming out in the last day. I think that the Democrats probably have a whole schedule of figures who are scheduled to come out and provide that kind of endorsement, really aiming at the at the middle of the road Republicans. The Republicans that we all want to believe in that are really there.
Somewhere. Someday we'll find them.
Somewhere. Do you think that she would endorse Harris?
No, I don't think so. I think for that exact reason that she's waiting in the wings to scoop in, swoop in rather, and scoop up all the ashes and recreate it, rebuild it again. So I think it'd be bad for her to start on that foot. She has to sort of stay loyal, as it were, but to the side. Yeah, we'll find out. I mean, all this from one dude, really. All this ties back to Trump.
I would never have thought that he was capable of what he has achieved just in terms of playing power. I could never understand this when he was a 2-bit property developer in New York City, is how did he get these? But, he was a student of Roy Cohn, who, as you know, was the attack dog for Eugene McCarthy in the McCarthy hearings. And he was close to Roy Cohn right up until Roy Cohn was on his deathbed with AIDS, and that's when Trump wouldn't come and see him. But he certainly learned all the lessons of getting and wielding power. But I think, one of the things that's not being talked about and we're not seeing very much attention, that giant sucking sound of any cash going into the RNC is going into the Trump campaign. Oh, yeah. And one of the things that was announced, I think in the last day or so, was that Harris has designated a very large amount to donating to down ballot races to get those congressional representatives elected and to help those swing state or help those Senate races that could be in trouble, or to try and get more. One of the things that I think that isn't being talked about, because a lot of the media just wants to talk about horse race politics.
Sure.
But this election will be won and lost on the get out the vote effort, and it's going to be won and lost on the staffing and the effectiveness of those teams, those small offices and those dedicated volunteers who are out there pounding the pavement. But there's a huge amount of money that has to be funneled to those people to effectively win those races. There are going to be defeated Republicans who are going to be very angry and very bitter that the Trump family siphoned off so much of the donations. He basically got a huge amount of what he took over was the fundraising capacity. Yeah. And we all know what Donald Trump wants to do with any fundraising capacity, which is to find a way for it to line his own pockets. So he does not care about those congressional races. He does not care about any of those people. He is loyal to only one person in the whole world, and that is Donald J. Trump. And he's just going to, so I think the weakness of the Republican Party hasn't even yet shown itself because everybody is still in their, on their knees, on bended knees, in their fealty position, the ring kissing position. Mm-hmm. But we're not seeing the weakness in the ground game that the Republicans must be experiencing, and the strength of the Democratic ground game. That's where I think this election is going to be determined.
Well, I mean, would you ever be friends with Donald Trump? I wouldn't. I don't think I would. He strikes me as a fake guy from the get-go.
If he called me up and wanted...
Yeah. Do you want to go for a coffee?
Wanted to be friends? No.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I'm busy. How about never? Does never work for you?
Let me check my calendar. Well, thanks so much for watching and or listening to Canada Watching U.S. News. Of course, again, I'm Brittlestar, and I'm here with Sandy Garacino. And you can find us at CanadaWatchingUSNews.com, where you can subscribe with your email, and you'll get an email notification every time there's a new episode. And you can just find us on your regular podcast platform. As we were talking before we went to record here today, we were skyrocketing to the number 22 position in news commentary. So we're hoping for 21.
Let's go for 21 and a toast to you, Rudy Giuliani. Here's to you.
No broken windows here. Sandy, you suggested that you had a great idea that people should be sending us questions so that we can talk about these questions during these episodes. Do you still feel that's a good idea?
I think that's a very good idea. I would love to hear what people think they want us to answer.
Yeah. And then just deal with it afterwards.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. If you'd like to leave us a question or a comment, feel free to do so underneath the podcast here on CanadaWatchingUSNews.com. We'll read it, and who knows? Maybe we'll rocket you into the 22 position in news commentary as well, or 21 if we get more success. We'll find out. So leave your questions or comments at CanadaWatchingUSNews.com, and we appreciate it. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
The audio version of Canada Watching U.S. News was produced, engineered, and edited by Owen Reynolds. The video version of the podcast was edited by Lisa Cumming. Our theme music is by Owen Reynolds. You can find past episodes and more at CanadaWatchingUSNews.com or your favorite podcast platform.